Good afternoon and welcome to Tambuli XChange, an online forum organized by the Asia Pacific Tambuli Awards by the University of Asia and the Pacific. I'm Jerry Gliachko, the Dean of the School of Communication of the University of Asia and the Pacific, and the Chairman of the Organizing Committee of the Asia Pacific Tambuli Awards, an award show on creative and effective brands with purpose. This afternoon's session of Tambuli XChange is also brought to you in partnership with ACUMEN Strategy Consultants, a strategy and marketing consultancy and capability building firm, as well as our agency partner, the Dentsu Aegis Network, and our technical production team, Eventscape Manila and Echochannels. The session for this afternoon will examine how brands are surviving in the midst of budget cuts in marketing, as well as other developments in the digital space, for example, where global brands have been pulling out advertising in Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, how ad agencies are also adding value to clients at this time, and more. Joining us in the panel this afternoon are 4 chief marketing officers of client companies. We have Lester Estrada, the Asia Pacific Marketing Director of Procter & Gamble, Sin Icasas, Marketing Director for Del Monte Philippines, Candice Iog, the Vice President for Marketing and Distribution of Cebu Pacific Air, and Pratik Thakar, the ASEAN Director for Integrated Marketing Communications at Coca-Cola. This session will also be moderated by the President and CEO of ACUMEN Strategy Consultants, Albert Quadrante. So welcome, Lester, Sin, Candice, Pratik, and Albert.
Well, thank you, Jerry.
Good.
Thank you to everyone for that today. Good afternoon. And to our esteemed panelists, thank you for sparing us some of your time. I'm sure you guys are all very busy nowadays, especially. And especially now that we're coming into our 4th month almost in community quarantine since that started last March 16 for Luzon, no? And I think we can pretty much all agree that this pandemic has dramatically changed our behaviors and continues to do so and impact us in a very unprecedented way almost. And these new behaviors and sentiments we've seen made it necessary for businesses like yours to almost do a 360-degree pivot for some cases just to be able to survive. And to help businesses like yours continually iterate and improve their plans towards recovery and position yourselves for better growth, we at ACUMEN put together an initiative called Navigate. It's a product of our extensive efforts to follow the progression of Filipino consumers, lifestyles, behaviors, sentiments, how they're changing over the various stages of the quarantine. So we started from a very strict ECQ and now we're on the GCQ format. So allow me to share some highlights of what we have uncovered with Navigate to help kick off our discussion today. For Pratik and Lester, because I'm aware that you're obviously also handling other countries in the Asia Pacific region, you may see a lot of similarities, but at the same time pick up some differences and nuances that are unique to your regions. And so during our discussion, I'd encourage you to feel free to call those out so that we can all learn from your experience as well. And so I'd like to start by refreshing ourselves with the 4 dominant characteristics of a typical Filipino. And this is necessary because it's important for us to understand the dual dimensions by which all of us live out these traits as Filipinos. So the first is family. And we all know family is an integral part of who we are. However, noticeably, our sense of solidarity and family really weakens as we go outside of our homes, so in the greater community in general. We're also very known as a people of faith, and this has been our secret sauce, if you like, to remain hopeful even through tough times. But it can also be easily sliding into some sense of inaction and complacency, because we are also unfortunately known for a bahala na type of attitude sometimes. We have also been described as a resilient people, but somehow we often find ourselves experiencing the same, sometimes painful mistakes that brought us a lot of difficulties in the past. And lastly, one of the traits that we are known for is being a wise spender, wanting everything to be sulit. But I'm sure you guys in marketing know, sometimes we can have unreasonable demands considering what we are willing to pay for. So sometimes ask for too much. So there's really a duality by which we live out our lives. And this duality cuts across the demographics, though manifested in different ways for sure. But it can help explain what we've uncovered under Navigate and what we're calling as COVID conflicts. And these conflicts are experienced by most after almost 4 months of, I'd even say, being in quarantine fatigue already at this point. So let's examine each of these conflicts in small detail. The first is home as a source of comfort versus stress. So before this whole thing happened, we would all come home from work tired, and home would be a source of comfort and rest. But now that everything happens inside the home and home has become a workplace as well, that kind of comfort has been mixed with the stresses of work that we can no longer leave behind physically in a space. The second is this whole attitude of exploration outside versus now being limited to the inside of the confines of our home almost. So that's why we hear people exploring their side of baking, doing a lot of DIY kind of experiments. This is what we're seeing now. Whereas before we had a YOLO kind of attitude where we would travel. I think later on Candice can relate to this very much, because that's the primary incentive for traveling. The third, a bit more painful, I think, would be this whole conflict or tension between being safe and secure versus really surviving. And especially for the lower income classes, where they really need to physically get out of their homes in order to resume work. And this has really been a big conflict almost. For some, this expressed in terms of sanity, people complaining about, oh, I need to get out, this is driving me insane already. So there's now this conflict between safety, security versus some form of survival. The fourth brings us to conflict between the family and our community. So we already mentioned earlier that we have a very strong sense of family as a Filipino, but now we are being demanded to extend that kind of concern to the bigger community because of the current pandemic and the way it is spread. And I think this is not coming naturally to us. If you see the behaviors and if you watch the news, a little bit of leeway in opening up barangays and cities, there's a surge of explosion of people trying to go out. So I think this is also a relevant conflict. The fifth, relevant to the brands at the moment, is I think loyalty you'd probably agree with me at this point, loyalty is kind of suspended. No? It's not in its usual state for many of us consumers, because we're really driven by trying to get our hands on what's available and what's readily accessible to us. And loyalty, if your usual brand is not there, okay, not a biggie. I just need to get my hands on certain things to survive this current situation. And lastly, this whole traditional conflict between physical and virtual has really kind of morphed in a way that now the virtual, whereas the gadgets before were kind of the enemy of the family, diba? People were always saying, keep your gadgets on the side where we're having dinner, etc. Now, the real way to connect actually is through the virtual landscape. And the virtual now has become a frenemy of sorts. No? So we need virtual technology to survive with our business, to reconnect with our consumers and our family members and friends in this current environment. So these are the 6 kind of conflicts that we have unearthed in our research under Navigate that we'd like to start and kick off our discussion today in terms of how most of your brands, not all of your brands, are addressing, seeing as opportunities almost. And maybe as a starting point for our discussion this afternoon, we'll start by looking at these conflicts more in terms of what opportunities. What opportunities do you see given the conflicts that we have shared with you? And maybe we can start with Candice off with that question. What sort of opportunities do you see, Candice, with the 6 kind of conflicts that we shared with you this afternoon?
I was on mute. Sorry. Again, I think the biggest opportunity that presents itself to us right now, and there's a meme that's going around now on what the who led digital transformation for organizations. It's really COVID, right? So I think, and it would be the same for a lot of organizations where, like us, there's very limited flights, limited operations. It's really not that much we can control. What we are doing right now to take advantage of this current situation is really accelerating our own digital transformation, using the current market conditions as a platform for change. It is a burning platform to actually drive contactless journeys. As an example, because right now health is already part of safety. It is expected now that if in the past we were trying to drive digital journeys, I think right now passengers expect it to be digital and contactless because of safety considerations. I think we've taken this opportunity also to really redefine all our processes and take a zero-based approach, because we now have to consider new behaviors that are emerging from the pandemic.
Right. Thank you, Candice, for that. Do you want to add anything to that, Pratik?
Yeah, sure, Albert. So what we looked at, there's always a kind of opportunity to grab a business. But this kind of situation, when arrives, we need to look at the opportunity to put our purpose. Every company has their purpose and their visions. Put our purpose in action. And that's what we did. We actually announced that we are going off air. We are not going to do advertising for a few months. A couple of months, we actually stopped advertising. We publicly announced that. And basically, we said we are not going to do this marketing and advertising for our all brands, but we are going to divert that budget and resources into helping people on the front line, helping NGOs like Red Cross and all. So that was one of the things which you leave your purpose. And this kind of opportunity doesn't come all the time, but we saw this as kind of an opportunity. Of course, no one was waiting for this or looking for that, but that was kind of a thing which we actually immediately activated.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Pratik. Would you say you've had similar opportunities that you see on your side, Sin, for Del Monte?
No, absolutely. And I can relate to what both Candice and Pratik have shared. Digital transformation, I truly am on board that COVID has forced all of us to move light years ahead of what we intended to do when it comes to digital and e-commerce. And I also believe in what Pratik is saying. I think it's almost like a gift to marketers what COVID has given to us, that we are now being forced to evaluate, is our brand truly adding value to our consumers? Because the brands that are adding value are the ones who are actually floating to the surface, floating to the top, and are being rewarded with purchase, right? And those that don't add meaning, unfortunately, are now suffering the consequences. And it feels like a wonderful opportunity for me as a marketer, at least, just purely as a marketer, to really do introspection for my brand and say, hey, what is the value I can add? How can I help truly make consumers' lives better with the products that I have? And I think if we all focus on that, then not only are we going to win in business, we're going to win with the community and help the Philippines win.
That's a good point, Sin. I think for P&G and coming on to Lester, I think one of the earlier things that you guys have shown is that you've already quickly pivoted to manufacturing masks that you didn't used to do before and all that. So tell us a little bit about that.
That's true.
Yeah, so actually the masks are not for selling, Albert, but it's something that we want to do more to serve institutions and our employees better. So it's actually leveraging existing resources and making sure that we serve the need. And it's true not just for masks, but some of the products where we kind of put it on the spotlight. Like Safeguard is one example, where before COVID, we were actually debating should we get into other benefit spaces. But this situation magnified the identity of Safeguard and kept all the debates. This is really what we're going to do in this period: drive superior degerming and antibacterial protection.
Great. So you guys pretty much touched on the topic of safety of health, supporting our frontliners and funneling your budgets towards that. I was wondering how you guys were reacting to the phenomenon we noticed where the loyalty is now suspended. How do you make sure that your brands still pretty much are at the top of space, even if, for example, for Candice, I think only a small portion of your flights are really available or
Right.
are there. No, so but you risk having people lose their mind space for your brand. So how are you dealing with that kind of situation?
I think right now it's really adjusting our communication, making sure that our focus right now, what we're finding we're doing more and more right now, is really listening to our customers more, trying to find out what their fears are, if there are any apprehensions, how do we address it. I think at the moment there is a need for brands to actually take this opportunity to build trust and confidence because the conditions have changed. In fact, the ball hasn't settled. We can't really say that current conditions will be the conditions by which we will operate in, say, next month. We find that today we are having to adjust our schedules and take it one day at a time. We're in an industry that that is used to planning our network 6 months, years in advance, because it determines the fleet that we order, the kind of aircraft that we order. We don't even have clarity on what our network 3 months down the line, 4 months down the line looks like, right? So I think that's a large part of why communication is very critical at this point, and really listening closely to what our customers are saying, listening to what they're not saying as well, and adjusting and taking it from there.
Thank you. Yeah, I think your industry is one of the more real challenged industries in this particular environment. Now, Pratik already alluded to this earlier about having no budget, and that's really the whole point of our conversation today. It's no secret that one of the coping mechanisms and strategies, short-term tactical strategies of most companies, is to really cut some investment, and marketing and advertising budgets have obviously been on the chopping block. And so we're now having to move towards until the end of 2020 with significantly less money than we're used to in terms of marketing our brands. Ironically, during the time when you really need to make sure that your brands are heard, to make sure that your brands are accessible, etc. And digital is not cheap, by the way. I mean, I think that's one of the other myths that we need to break. Is digital is not necessarily cheap. So with virtually no budget, how are you guys looking at capitalizing on the opportunities that you found out along the way, and now that you're having to try and see whether it will play a big role in your survival or recovery? How are you managing with that? We'll start with you, Pratik, since you brought up that topic earlier.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I would say one is the budget, no budget, or I would say redirecting your resources, right? how do we redirect our resources where it matters the most. So we actually looked back. Fortunately, Coca-Cola has a history of 134 years. So we looked at how we handled world wars, how we handled financial downturns, how we handle other this kind of situations. And what was one of the thing very consistent was that we were optimistic. We were stubbornly optimistic. So that was one of the key things. And then we said, okay, what if we partner with all the frontliners and create a campaign of positivity, a global campaign, without spending too much money, but doing a different way of piloting, a different production way, different way of creating idea. And and that's what we created, a campaign called For the Human Race. Now, this is not a campaign of brand selling product. That was not the time to actually talk about our products, but it's about talking about the optimism and what company as a Coca-Cola company can bring to the table to everyone. So that was the starting point. And then, of course, we started with Coke Studio. 2 weeks back, Katy Perry performed on online Coke Studio, and that's where again all the money goes back to Red Cross. So we were streaming Coke Studio continuously. One side we were entertaining people were stuck at home, but the other side we were also giving opportunity for artists to be on to create their own awareness and be engaged with their audience and create a donation for Red Cross. So again, we need to find those ways where artists are kind of willing to do things which usually they don't do. They were also kind of pro bono. They were performing. We were also pro bono. So it's like all these things. Otherwise, we would have not done this kind of pilots. We would have not done this kind of initiatives, which took place because of this situation.
And how are you seeing the response of your consumers to these types of efforts, Pratik?
Absolutely positive. Actually, it's much more positive than normal advertising you do or normal stuff we do, because that's emotionally. They know that brand is talking to me. They're selling me something. Yeah. Here they know that brand is going beyond their kind of commercial interest, and they are being much more kind of meaningful. So again, I would look at things from a very as we in Coca-Cola we say glass half full perspective, and but that's the way we need to look at these situations. Yeah.
Okay. In your case, Sin, what have you been doing to try and maximize what little we have at the moment?
What little we have. Well, Del Monte was in a slightly luckier position because, as you said, right, people are now home much more. And what we found is, and everybody has lived through this, right? Whereas before, a person would probably personally cook once a day, so 7 times a week. Now they were forced to cook or prepare a meal as much as 35 times a week, right? 35 times a week. And what we found out is the best thing we could do is offer value or provide value that goes beyond our physical products. Of course, we have the best quality products that are for your culinary needs, but having something like Del Monte Kitchenomics, which has a wealth of information, thousands of recipes that help consumers who are now stressed out about having to cook 35 meals a week, having value-added services like that makes a big difference to consumers.
That's great to hear. On Del Monte Kitchenomics, I think one of the insights that we've uncovered there is since many people have stocked your products as part of their pantry, and I guess as a safety measure, in fact, even not really wanting to frequently go out and buy grocery. Now they're left with the question, well, what am I going to do? I can't eat the same spaghetti over and over. So your Del Monte Kitchenomics, I think, would be a very good way for people to have to vary what they can do with what they've stockpiled in their pantries with so many things that they bought from you. And I guess you're lucky in that way. And Kitchenomics is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, really started out as a way for Del Monte to gain a loyalty program among its current base. So I think that's going to also play a very, very key role for you guys moving forward.
Well,
Let's
that's
really
true.
hear from. Sorry, go ahead, Sin.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say that is true, but I also want to build that Kitchenomics serves a very important purpose. When it was founded, it was about economics because it was during the economic downturn, right? And now we find ourselves once again here to help consumers find things or plan their whole week or 2 weeks easily with Kitchenomics, and to plan it in a way that suits a budget. It's again going back to its core, kitchen economics, and that value add is great for loyalty. But I think that it's very fulfilling to me to know that it's helping consumers get through home as a source of stress.
Yes, because I'm glad you pointed that out because of that conflict. I think you're providing, homemakers a way to kind of also express themselves in experimenting. So it also kind of addresses the whole exploration bit. Some people are baking, other people are trying their hand at cooking. Maybe not always successful, but let's let the family decide that. Okay, so I'll move on to Lester in terms of how you're maximizing your budget at the moment.
Yeah, we're no stranger to budget constraints, Albert. We've had a lot of fiscal year ends to train us for that. And whenever we have that situation, I always go back to the shelf. Kasi walang bayad sa shelf, di ba? That's something that you own. It's your real estate. And whatever we can do to maximize productivity there is already a win. Whether it's simplifying our portfolio there, driving clarity on your strategy, because shelf is really the translation of your strategy in the boardroom. And sharpening the communication there, even the claims. Generally, the in-store environment is filled with stimuli and filled with spending elements also. So I would always go back to what are the number 1, 2, and 3 priorities there. Maybe if I could add, it's a good segue also to what helps clarify our budget whenever we're in a pinch. It's always good to use these situations to really be sharper in terms of what your number 1 mission or objective is. A lot of times when we're living in funding luxury, right? When it's not a recession, we layer too many objectives. I want this for my media. I also want this. And that drives cost inadvertently without us realizing. But in this situation, I used it as an opportunity to say, this is the only thing that matters to me. Maximum reach at the lowest possible cost. And it's always good to articulate, although it's not popular, what are the things that you're willing to compromise because you're working off a budget constraint. Maybe you don't need prime time spending because what is prime time nowadays, right? And that's something that you're willing to let go, as an example.
I like the point that you made there, Lester, about this whole thing. I think what we're finding out also is that since we have been forced to kind of simplify almost, that we can actually do quite a few things with still very simple resources available to us. And that's really what brings out creativity. I think we're put in a situation, we're forced to think about how we maximize. We only have so much, we have to stretch. And I think that's really very much what you're saying. What I'm taking out from what you said is maybe sometimes we've overspent or we've overthought or we've overlayered, and I think it's a good time to kind of reevaluate that and go back to the mission or your purpose as you were alluding to. I'll turn now to Candice because it was Candice who first brought up this point on digital as the basic or the main opportunity that you really see in this environment. Is digital really the only solution you think, or is that would you say is that 90% of what we have to work with at the moment? And would you say even boldly that traditional media or traditional advertising is in effect canceled?
Yeah, I think tricky question, right? But I'll go back to what Obi-Wan Kenobi would always say. Only the Sith deals in absolutes, right? So, no, seriously though, I think each medium has its strengths. But instead of approaching this from a canceling outright traditional and deciding full on that everything now becomes digital, I think we go back to the premise, and Lester alluded to it earlier. You go back to the mission, you go back to the objective. I go back to the business and work on identifying what the problem is. What is it are we trying to solve for? And then we can start there and find the best way to achieve the desired outcome. It might not be digital. We are, while we're already remapping, redefining what the contactless experience will be, we have to be cognizant of the fact that there will still be a large base of our customers that will not have smartphones, for example, that don't have credit cards and will still transact in cash. So it's not absolute. I think it goes back to solving for the customer need and then finding the best way to deliver on that need and achieve the business outcome.
All right. Thank you for that, Candice. And I'd like to now switch back to Lester, because I think you and Candice also alluded to, going back to your mission, etc., and the purpose in your business objective. Now, as you go in that space and look at, the digital solution and the digital media as a solution or as a means by which you communicate with your consumers, I'd go back to the question: how are you now using, because P&G is also a very known spender in the traditional media landscape. So what's happened there?
Yep. So Albert, I would say traditional media is not cancelled, but for sure traditional planning is. Especially now, right? We've had to throw a lot of things out of the window. With many different things. People are at home. Who knows what time is? We've lost the network and a few more to that degree. In that way, there's a lot more pressure for depth. Where are consumers shifting to? A lot of times, when we lost one network, ABS-CBN, right? Some of its consumers did not jump to digital right away. A lot of ABS-CBN viewers, for example, will be in the rural areas wherein they would only have access to that one network. And they would have been relegated to radio. So we actually increased spending on radio for some of our categories. Okay? So we went even more traditional as an example. But of course, digital has been a very important player in the last 4 months. And it's also important to be cognizant how our relationship with media have changed, right? It's a lot more research oriented. So think of the Dalgona coffee trend, right? There's a lot more research involved in how you make Dalgona coffee. That almost like when you go to the store, it's not browsing anymore. It's just fulfillment because you've made up your mind already. You know what ingredients you're working on. And therefore, search has been much more integral. Even in TV, it's a lot more information oriented than entertainment. I wouldn't even specify which channels to go after. It's actually a lot more on which spots, which hours, and where do they gravitate towards to get the information that they need.
I think this question is being paid close attention to by your agencies. So I just see a lot more comments in the movement of our comment section. But we'll try to also hear from how Coca-Cola is doing it, because I see a lot of activity from Coke on digital. And I was wondering, again, you mentioned this earlier, Pratik, where you've actually reprioritized your budget allocation, and even on social media. Well, most recently, that's gone away. So where's the support going? Apart from supporting the frontliners, etc., are there types of advertising or media spending that are still being utilized?
Yep. So Albert, basically what we did, we came back with our business plans and IMC plans. But then and we were planning to go full-fledged social media and digital oriented, because our food aggregators and all those kind of business is growing very fast. So it was making sense. But then we decided to pause our social media spending across the world for very different reasons. Again, going back to your principles and your value system. And we just launched actually a television campaign supported by other digital channels, not social media. So we just launched that. Now, what new thing we are doing, or we have something which we have never done, we just launched actually campaign in Philippines that has multi-brand. So you will see Coca-Cola, you will see Royale, you will see Wilkins in one commercial. So it's a very different content strategy. So you design your content in a very innovative way. So your planning and your content creation is changing the game versus the media. And yes, we are on TV, but we are also on multiple other digital platforms where we can drive transactions like food aggregators and those kind of platforms. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Pratik. I think your point kind of stimulated a question that I've received now. So one question is, you mentioned about content, and many of the content that's being developed right now are kind of on the emotional, feel-good type of content for many of the brands. And so the question is, hard sell gone? You can't do traditional hard sell advertising anymore. Is this not the right time for that? Is that an insensitive thing to do at this point, or is there a good way to be able to still kind of put the product in front without necessarily kind of appearing insensitive? Would you like to take that, Sin?
We are a hard sell company, aren't we? But I think it's all about balance. You know, to be honest, there's no such thing as hard sell if your product is inherently relevant and important to consumers. And if you design against the consumer need, then you can go soft sell, you can go a soft advertising, you could do hard advertising, but it will still resonate. And the question on whether people will talk about it now, that's a different question. People will talk about soft sell advertising a lot more, but whether you will get the product in the hands of the consumer, hard sell, soft sell, for me, is not as important as what purpose is your product fulfilling for your consumer.
Okay, because I think at the moment the what people or what the marketing community is trying to kind of balance is, we need sales, but at the same time we can't be too like in your face, right? Because it's not a good time to be that way. Your point of view on that, Lester?
Albert, I was just laughing because when you said hard sell and there's no space for it, I remember all of my subdivision Viber groups and Facebook groups. Everyone there seems to be selling hard, right? So I think there is space for it. But trying to integrate every product to a COVID situation and safety, maybe it's not the best idea. And I can say that with confidence because I have featured on one end. But obviously, you have me on the other end, which has no relationship there, right? And we've had many conversations on how to be relevant in this environment. And certainly, there were times wherein I felt that's a little bit too much. We're not trying to take advantage of the situation here. What we're trying to do is serve the consumer. And maybe if we stay with that principle, then we'll be a lot better for it.
I think you made an excellent point there, Lester, because you're absolutely right. I mean, Viber, some of the Viber communities practically ram products down your throat on a day-to-day basis. It's hard to keep up, no? And I'm wondering if there is that kind of emerging evolution in terms of the way people receive information. Are they more receptive to that kind of hard sell, if you like, versus a brand or a company being the one doing it? It feels more insensitive if the company or a brand does it, whereas if a private person it almost seems like a direct sell kind of initiative. Your point of view on that, Candice, what do you think about that? Is hard selling really something that would not benefit a brand at the moment?
I think our current conditions kasi will really require us to rethink how we sell. Now, whether it's hard or soft, no, I think it really depends on how it's framed. It could be a hard sell framed so well that the audience doesn't actually realize that they're being sold to, right? And that then goes back to the importance of really listening to what the needs are and addressing them, providing the right message to the right person at the right time. The hard sell happening in Viber, that happens everywhere. I don't know if it's effective, right? Because by the time you open it, there's like 300 messages and you'd have to scroll for hours just to look for what you're looking for. And so I think it's really around how we can now be more precise in targeting to the audience that will find what you're selling relevant at the time you provide the information. I think that's where digital, it has an advantage. I mean, we are using digital information. We are in a position to actually identify, say, for example, who has been searching, in our case, who has been searching for a specific route in the past 2 weeks, and therefore use that information to capture intent and feed that back into network planning and say there has been multiple searches for this destination, and then maybe there is a demand for it, and therefore we should put it in the schedule. Because I like what Lester said earlier on, traditional planning is out, no, not traditional media, and that is what we find ourselves doing. We don't have historical load factors to base our yield management on. Everything is out the window. And so we have now a daily agile squad talking about what the network should look like, how we sell, and taking now different data points as input to how we then sell and market to the audience.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Thank you for that, Candice. I guess what many are interested in finding out now, and I'm reading through some of the questions that are coming in, would be if you were given your top 2 priorities with whatever marketing budget you have to work with at the moment, and given the shifts that you're seeing, your answers would probably be able to catch also some of the related questions that we're seeing for this particular segment. So what would be your top 2 marketing priorities with your existing budget? We'll start off with you, Sin.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm always a firm believer that marketers are the hub, right? We have to take care of every aspect of the business. And for me, the most important things that we would do, really, number one, understand the consumer. Everything that we know about the consumer has actually shifted because we've all had our values tested, our priorities tested. Every consumer has gone through that, and understanding that journey of the consumers and where they're ending out, for me, is number one. And number 2 would be understanding it proper. It's that important for me as a priority for the rest of the year.
So a large part of the budget will be around research. Is that a fair statement to make?
I think so. For us, yes.
Okay, good. Lester, how about for P&G?
Yep. So 2 things: wherever the consumer learns and researches. In many ways, that tends to be YouTube for some of our categories. Other times, it's online forums. So it's really just deciphering where do they absorb the information. So that's one space. And then the second is wherever they actually decide what to buy. And I alluded to it. It's the shelf most of the time. Sometimes it's the online space, right? It's online shelf equivalent. But those are 2 things that I would hold pristine, while everything else would tend to be variable.
Okay, fairly similar also. I think we're seeing the agreement that consumer understanding, staying in close touch with how the consumers are moving and behaving over the course of where our situation will take us is primary importance to us. Candice, is there anything different for Cebu Pacific?
Yeah. Right. I'll build further on what Sin and Lester have mentioned. It's really understanding the consumer and then taking from there, finding out what we need to do as a business to build trust and confidence, rebuild it, especially in our industry where people are anxious about traveling. I think it is critical right now that we over communicate, communicate changes. People are on the lookout for answers. answers to help them navigate all of these uncertainties. And things are still changing as we speak because the ball hasn't settled. And so more than ever, I think it's really over communicating these changes, not just to our customers, but even to our employees, and being as clear as we can on what these changes, on what to expect are, because really, ultimately, clarity is kindness.
Yeah, thank you. I think very, very, very clear. For Coca-Cola, Pratik, your top 2 priorities.
Yep. So first of all, don't set very long-term priority. Even 6 months is a long-term in today's terms. Yeah. So I would recommend set a very short-term. There is no long-term without short-term. So look at short-term. Look at some of the pilots. Again, learning from what consumer behavior has changed. Apply that immediately. Do those pilots, and then again see what happens after 1 month or 2 months. So I would. So that's what we are doing actually. But the first priority is to really do the priority for 6 months.
Thank you. I guess many of you also, before this questions, talked about digital in a very big way. And I'm assuming apart from research, part of the budget allocation moving forward would be somewhat also put on the digital space. But just relating the digital part to research, have you been doing a lot of digital based research? Because before this, myself included, I was really yet convinced that the digital way of doing research is probably representative, especially of the mass market, because they don't probably have access to the digital platforms. But now, how are you kind of maneuvering your consumer understanding blueprint in relation to your preference for digital? And maybe I'll start with you, Pratik, since you are the last one who spoke. Have you been doing a lot of digital consumer understanding, digital based, excuse me, consumer understanding?
So actually, our research methods are not really to conduct a research. Actually, there is a lot of digital data is available. So behavior change data is already available, and that's why you partner with those people and implement using those data. You implement those programs. So that's working for us better than kind of starting a new research project, whether it's a digital or manual. But we think right now it's working with the data, and data, this is like a web system is a big research, it's a big focus group. So we need to capture the signals and act on those signals using data. That's what is happening right now.
Okay, because I think one of the concerns is that if we do a lot of digital research, we really miss the pulse of the mass in that particular format, and that's why I'm wondering if this is the kind of priority that we will have moving forward. It's really interesting how we would kind of marry that into what the mass has an access to, and I think that would be an interesting thing to watch, especially for many of the research companies who are probably here also watching. And that's an opportunity, definitely, that you're hearing from the marketing people, marketing communities. We need information, we need to stay in touch, but we understand that the traditional way of question and answer interview is probably not the best way to do that at the moment. So how do we put some accuracy to that? Follow-up question is, many people are asking how your outlook is for the rest of the year. So bring out your crystal balls, and this is the time that people want to know what your thoughts are on what's the business outlook for the balance of the year. So let's start with.
I can already answer because my answer is short.
All right, so Candice.
And I think it's no surprise to anyone out there, and even in our investor calls, the same has already been said. Our industry has been hit the hardest by this pandemic. And so balance of 2020, I think it's no secret, it's bleak. I think we've already mentioned several times, and not just for Cebu Pacific, I think even industry papers show that the recovery for this industry will be a long and protracted one. Recovery will not happen in 12 months' time. That's for sure. It depends very much on when the vaccine will be ready, when vaccine will be available to more people, and people are more confident about traveling again. I think the added complexity here is also travel restrictions, not just international travel restrictions, but even today what we grapple with, which is different restrictions for different local government units, who are understandably coming up with different regulations because they are afraid that they will get a second wave, as an example. So yeah, no surprise from Cebu Pacific there on what the outlook is.
Yes, well, I think we can all agree that it's really a long road ahead for many of us. Even the ones that are relatively rather unaffected, still it's not a normal situation. So we like to think that we're all in the same storm, but we're riding different types of boats. Some are just sturdier, some are rafts. So
I think if I can just add, no, I think why we paint it as a bleak balance of the year, what we are realizing now is that hope is now a strategy.
that's right. Oh, somebody, my former boss would gave me flack with that, but now yes,
I know.
hope is strategy.
It is not, but it is now being mentioned more and more in many meetings that, well, we hope that the demand will come back, and we hope, and so yeah, I know hope is now becoming more and more.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question. What's one of the worst case scenarios marketings are preparing for? So that's kind of related to the outlook. So I'd like to kind of bring that in just to give a little bit of new flavor to the previous question. This is anyway related. So what's the worst case scenario? Is there any? If you like, wave two probably. So anyone want to take that?
I can take it. So of course, aside from the obvious, which is the recession part, which could dial down the outlook by a few points here and there. Maybe a subcut of the recession is commoditization of certain categories. And that's a worst case for P&G because we don't play commoditization game very well. We harp on superiority and driving value, growing the category far more than a lot of the other smaller players there. And that's something that we're being very cautious about because we don't want to see a revolution of the category value.
And that's really also related, Lester, somewhat to the conflict of loyalty is kind of suspended at the moment, right?
Yep.
And very much so that brands like yourselves, you have very, very good, established, well-loved brands. You don't want to fall into that pesos and cents kind of discussion, just almost, right? Pratik, can we hear from you?
Yeah, I think it's the ecosystem, right? So our business is dependent on our ecosystem. So let's say in Philippines, basically sari stores, small food outlets and restaurants and those kind of places. And this applies not just to Philippines, across the world, across ASEAN also. So we need to prepare and plan for how do we help take everyone together and kind of support. So that's one of the big challenge and kind of a priority we have, that how do we help those people sustain their business to help do our business. Otherwise, you cannot just plan our business and let them go into problem.
Yeah, thank you. I couldn't agree more. For Sin, I think it's when people start not cooking at home. But just kidding. I want to hear from you, Sin. What do you think about what's the worst case scenario from the Del Monte perspective?
Oh, from a Del Monte perspective, I think I think the biggest is, you're right. If people stop cooking at home, that will be a problem for us. But a very critical part for us is actually Christmas. We have Del Monte fruit cocktail, and we have pineapples, and we have the tomato sauce, spaghetti sauces, which play a big role in our traditional Christmas celebrations. For us personally, we're preparing for the worst, we're hoping for the best, and we're pushing for the best. But we know that Christmas is going to be a very different celebration this year. And we are trying to figure out how can we be relevant in this new kind of Christmas celebration in a COVID world, because we know consumers are going to be adjusting how they celebrate, how often, how many people, what are they going to do, etc. Yeah, and that's going to be critical for us.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, Christmas is a really big deal here for us, and it's everybody's peak season. I don't know anyone who doesn't peak its business on Christmas. So it's really something that people are kind of watching very closely also. And well, I guess hoping that we were seeing a lot of forecasts about vaccine availability and all of that coming into the early quarter, fourth quarter. So we're hoping for that. Probably another question just to round out probably our discussion today would be many of those who enlisted to listen in to today's session are from the agency. So they want to know what areas do you think your agencies can add value best to you during this time, especially when their usual value add work is kind of suspended almost or deprioritized. What are you asking for from your agencies? Let's hear from Candice.
I think what we've also shared with our agency, I think what's important is for agencies to step away from the storyboard, right? Step away from these all of these creative ideas and all of these exciting things that they do want to do with a business. I think agencies and creatives may tend to overuse these skills, which is great, which is what comes naturally to agencies. That is what they bring to the table. But what I mean when I say step away from the storyboard first is really at the moment, so many things have changed, and what would be useful for business and what I'd like to see from agency is to actually add value to business by solving their business problems. They can bring to the table their strength in communication, in storytelling, and the general connectedness to consumer pulse, and not having that bias, right, which business being so close to the product or the brand would tend to have. So I would say that would be how they could add value.
Okay. So a good thing I picked up from you is stepping away from the storyboard. That's actually a good line. I like that. What about Pratik for Coca-Cola? What would be your expectation from your agencies now that you've shifted and reprioritized budgets?
I would say two things. One is be nimble and be proactive, because right now there are no real briefs, right? When you don't have a lot of data, lot of business plans, and all those things, everything continuously changing. Be proactive and nimble. Stay close to the business problems and solving them as you heard before. So be nimble. That's the number one thing. And find different solutions rather than kind of do what you have done in 2019. That's not going to happen. It's not going to you can't use the same playbook this year. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sin, can we hear from you?
Yeah, well, just to build, I think, interestingly, the most important thing for me from agencies will be on strategic planning. It might be a little less critical than creative at this point in time, since the strat planners will help us really capture what's going on with consumers, will really set the context that any communications may or may not be placed in, right? So I think focus on strat planning before anything. Go slow to go fast, right? Have a solid understanding before we go into any execution. And that means consumer understanding and strat planning. And then I will echo what Candice and Pratik said: be nimble, be agile, be proactive, and and let's talk about more than just TVCs, and let's also talk about more than 3-minute films that will be designed to tear jerk from the COVID situation.
Thank you, Sin. I think we're kind of seeing a lot of that already. And Lester, your take on what your agencies should be doing during this time.
I think a lot more depth and a lot more quantitative thinking. We're way past themes and motherhood statements, and I say this to myself also because it's very easy to jump into qualitative conclusions. But given the volatility that's happening and the drastic shifts that we're seeing in media consumption, channel shifts, we do expect our partners to bring that in because we're in a wartime setting, and the teams that can adjust the most to volatility will be the ones to stand to gain most from this situation and to serve consumers better.
And I guess just to connect everything that I've heard from you guys, and since this afternoon's early session part would be consumer understanding and the digital space, and so I would say that these should also echo the priorities of your agency somewhat, right? Because it's such an important thing for you to be maybe a little bit half a step ahead. Can't be any more one or two because Lord knows what will happen. Maybe just half a step ahead with how consumers are behaving, and in terms of their the robustness of their digital offerings or their digital solutions, advertising wise or media wise. That's certainly something that the agencies have to seriously look into because that's where much of the investment is going to nowadays. But I think it was Sin who made a point where, but we're not just after tear jerkers or generating 100,000 likes on social media. Of course not. And we would like to see more of what the agencies can bring to the table beyond a 3-minute tearjerker tribute and all of these things. So that's a good point, and I think loud and clear to the agencies. Now, I saw a small question on PR, the role of PR, because PR has always been if you like, the ugly stepsister of creative agencies. So it's a kind of a by the way almost. It's not a very deliberate part of the marketing plan sometimes. So now I think we're seeing a lot of PR moving into the front line with what's happening. And is that something at all that you've been increasingly utilizing? I see Pratik nodding. Can I get your thoughts on that, Pratik?
I think PR has a huge opportunity and it's a center stage of current situation. So whether you look at social media situation and what's happening on that platform, or the COVID or everything. So I would say if a PR agency, it's a great opportunity to up your game. We do use PR experts, and that's a huge opportunity for all brands, definitely.
Any other thoughts on the role of PR? We can accommodate one more. Yeah, good. All right, so I just checked the time, and it seems that it just flew by. We've been getting a lot of good conversation, so that's very, very good. I think many people learned from our own discussions here, and I'd like to thank everyone for obviously participating. But in closing, I would just ask for a quick fire question, and asking each one of you to give me maybe one word answer to how are you feeling, what are your sentiments at the moment, and a brief why. So just one word and why are you feeling that. And let's start with Pratik.
Optimistic. So definitely things are getting better than, let's say, what was there in February or March. So and as a company, Coca-Cola company is a stubbornly optimistic company. So basically, we know that we'll go through this, and also overall we will come out much more stronger. So that's the thinking right now. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Sin, your one word.
Well, my word is 2 words. I'm going to hyphenate. Building on what Pratik is saying, I'd say cautiously optimistic. There's a lot of things that are starting to move in the right direction, but for every 2 steps forward, we do see things taking 1 step back. That said, I think that Del Monte, with its focus on quality and taste and healthy products, we're in a good position to help consumers through this pandemic, and hopefully that would allow us to have a strong business at the end of this, while still being able to help the consumer, the Filipino. So cautiously optimistic on my end.
That's still one word, so that's good.
I'm feeling jittery, Albert. The good and bad of it. Like obviously nervous to step out in life and back into the marketing world, but still very excited with what's to come and what we can do better to serve our many consumers.
Well, I like the honesty of admitting the jittery feeling, because I think many of us are quite still jittery at the moment, despite the many assurances and the many things that we're seeing in terms of the horizon. And let's round out the panel with Candice. Your word.
Yeah, Albert. I think my word is balance. I think we started this session with you sharing a duality. There is a duality in our current condition. And so it's finding our balance amidst the duality, redefining what's important, given, I think what's important, the fact that our options and our actions are highly restricted to a very small space. Whether it's movement, whether it's budgets, whether it's travel demand for us, which puts to test our agility, because we also need to prepare for that time when markets open up and the pace picks up, and we have to also be ready to start running again. So it's really finding that balance in this current situation that prepares for current and prepares for future.
Thanks a lot. I think everyone will agree that this has certainly been a very fruitful kind of conversation. We are all, I think, at a certain level optimistic, cautiously optimistic, a little bit jittery, and of course wanting a sense of achieving that kind of balance as we move forward. Because as you rightly pointed out, Candice, once the vaccine is identified and launched, the situation can just as abruptly change for the better. And we have to also be ready for that, because in as much as we are planning for worst case scenario, I think there's a certain group of people in our company who should be in parallel planning for that optimistic scenario when something is discovered and makes things better for all of us. So thank you again. And I think I'm one with everyone here in making sure that what we've discussed today brings a lot of learnings to us, and we move forward with that. And we want to thank again everyone who's organized this for us, Tambuli, and of course our guest panelists today, and everyone who's joined us and participated through their questions. Thank you very much. And, I'm hoping that we can all recover from this better and stronger. I'll turn it back to you, Dr. J.
Thank you to our panelists. That was a great session. Thank you, Albert, Lester, Sin, Candice, and Pratik. Thank you for joining us. And to all our viewers, thank you also for being with us. Before we end, I'd just like to acknowledge once again our partners, the ACUMEN Strategy Consultants, the Dentsu Aegis Network, and Eventscape Manila, Echochannels for making this show possible. Thank you for watching, and good afternoon.
Thank you.
Are we out?